Hi there. So my name is Matthew McNulty, and this talk is going to be all about Polymer. So this is sort of our Polymer keynote, if you will. So before yesterday, how many of you, show of hands, have heard of Polymer? Excellent. All right, so you're going to be excited because we've got some new stuff to show today that we didn't even show yesterday. And then if you haven't, for those of you who don't know about Polymer, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction first. So Polymer is part of the web platform team on Chrome. And as part of the web platform team, it's our job to make web developers like you more successful and the apps you build more awesome. And the Polymer team does that by bringing app-like immersive experiences to the web on mobile and desktop. So Polymer officially began about 3 years ago, just under. But it began a little bit earlier than that with the invention of web components a few years before that. So we've talked about Polymer at I/O for a couple of years now. But we've always used a lot of caveats, like developer preview and pre-alpha, and basically whatever we could make up to say, please don't judge us too harshly yet, because it's still kind of baking. So today, to the terror of my engineering team, those caveats are gone. So today, we introduce Polymer 1.0. And Polymer is now ready for production, and it's entirely new in the last year. So if you looked before, we've written it entirely from scratch. So we kept what developers loved, but made it much smaller, faster, and simpler. And I'm going to tell you all about it. Taylor's going to show you it in use today across Google and elsewhere. Eric's going to deep dive into Google scale production applications built with Polymer. And Addy's going to show you how you can get started today. So that's a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. So Polymer isn't simply a better version of something else out there. It's not like things that came before. So that 1.0 after it has a deeper meaning than just a version number. So it signifies something totally new. So starting out at Google a few years ago, we were given a really bold mission to do something totally new and build on something revolutionary and dramatically change web development. So to get right out on the bleeding edge of standards and start pushing and vetting new concepts. And from out here, looking at the landscape of web development, we see the world a little differently with a different perspective. Web developers don't generally have the freedom to spend time out on the bleeding edge, because you got stuff to do. And browser implementers who come up with the standards aren't web developers. And from this perspective, web development right now is pretty crazy. Everyone's fighting all the time. So there's tons of frameworks and tons of choice, but it's all different, and none of it works together. It's a complicated world, and everyone's fighting. So all of these frameworks have an idea of components, little bits of apps that can be used in different applications. But they're all different, and they don't work together. And working together is the key. So I can explain this a little better with an analogy. So we sit in the San Francisco office of Google. We're kind of lucky that way. And it's right down the street here on the bay. So this is actually our view. I took this picture a couple months ago. And ever since we moved into this office, about 60% of the casual conversation in the office has revolved around container ships, because it's what we see going by all day, the entire time. And it turns out the shipping container is a really interesting thing. See, before shipping containers, everything was custom. You made a thing, and if you wanted to move a lot of them, you built a pallet for it. And at every stage of the journey, everything was done by hand. And to fix this, they didn't standardize boats or standardize trucks to be exactly the same in silos. They standardized the containers and made everything that carries them able to carry the same container. And the same container can go from truck to train to boat, all without ever being unpacked, with maximum efficiency. And this makes the whole system work together. And these boats can carry an enormous amount of cargo. So we actually looked it up because we were curious as to how much cargo, like what's the value of cargo of every ship we see go by. And it turns out on average about $1 billion to $1.5 billion. So what's this got to do with web development? Building a web app today is also really challenging. It takes an enormous amount of expertise to get right, especially across multiple platforms and multiple form factors. So the web isn't any less capable than other platforms. It's just a lot harder to get exactly right. It's really easy to get on board, but difficult to master. So the answer to this is web components. And web components fix this the same way that shipping containers did as well, interoperability. And let me explain what that means. HTML works everywhere, in every framework. If you stick a button tag in your code, it works everywhere. If you build a button in Angular or React, it only works in an Angular or React app. And the same goes for all of the existing frameworks. They're all silos. And that's been the state of the art. And that doesn't mean that these are bad. It just means that web components are a different thing. So the button tag works everywhere, and that would be great, but button is pretty lame, and apps demand better. Web components introduce custom elements. So no longer just a button, but fancy buttons, like material design buttons. And not just fancy buttons, but headers and drop-downs and switches and sliders. Everything you need to build up into a really cool app, like the IO web app I'm pretty sure every single one of you use that was written in Polymer. And unlike fancy custom elements you've seen before, web components are interoperable. So existing HTML is a set of tools useful 20 years ago for building documents, not applications. And web components now add this another layer of functionality above the platform but below other frameworks. New elements you can add, you can use everywhere. And this dramatically changes the web platform. And it unlocks this future of the web development today that we've been talking about, a future where we all work together. And you don't have to roll your own UI or choose from an array of siloed frameworks. You can pick from off the shelf, from this ever-increasing collection of custom bits and pieces to build your app, or even make your own. And if you build something awesome, anyone can use it anywhere. So web components are this revolution. Web components are the shipping container that standardizes everything. And Polymer is a library for building web components. It makes it faster and easier to build standard web components you can use everywhere. So Polymer is different. Polymer isn't a framework. Let me say that again. Polymer is not a framework. And that's not some distinction without a difference. Polymer is not a framework because the very premise of web components is that they are not a framework. And it isn't just here to replace some other framework. It's not about Polymer versus something else, because web components built with Polymer can work with everything else. So we've been saying this about web components and Polymer for a little while now, but even if you listened before, there's kind of, to those of you who have seen it before, there's reason to look again. And that's because Polymer 1.0 is brand new. So we spent the last year rebuilding it. So building something that the biggest and the best web apps can depend on demands a really high bar. So about partway through last year, we realized we could do better than what we had already. So we rewrote a new Polymer, a production-ready Polymer. And it's one that maintains the same great features and ergonomics developers love most, but in a new package, rewritten with a laser focus on speed and reduced complexity. So let's take a look at how we did, starting with speed. So it's 3 times faster on Chrome than the previous version, 4 times faster on mobile Safari. So Safari is still slower overall on Chrome because it doesn't have native web components, but it's a lot closer now. And in terms of code complexity, 1.0 is 35% less code overall. That's only 42K gzipped, including all the polyfills and everything. And in fact, thanks to a new modular design, as little as 19K can get you started with Polymer. So that's really, really small, and over 60% less code than it was originally. And all this comes with the same great features that Polymer had before. It sugars the underlying web component syntax, it adds features to make them easier and simpler to use. It adds new features to make it easier to build whole systems out of components. This makes components easier to click together into more complex components or even apps. And 1.0 brings a lot of new features, but I'm just going to talk about 2 of the bigger ones today. So a lot of what developers told us they didn't like about Polymer was actually the Shadow DOM polyfill, not Polymer. You see this today all over the web. So the polyfill was technically awesome, but complex. It was globally intrusive. And if you weren't careful, you could be slow on mobile platforms. And it was never actually meant to be fast. It was meant to be complete. So we replaced it in 1.0 with a simpler shim that we called Shady DOM, sort of Shadow DOM. So it uses Shadow DOM on platforms like Chrome that support it, and a simpler, less capable mechanism on less capable browsers. So it's not a perfect replacement in terms of API compatibility like the Shadow DOM polyfill. It makes some trade-offs for performance. But it's meant to disappear as soon as other browsers ship web components. And the other major new feature in 1.0 is theming and styling with CSS Custom Properties. So web components introduced scoping to the DOM tree, and CSS was built assuming a single unscoped tree. And that's made the intersection of CSS and web components fit together really oddly, with special selectors made to cross Shadow DOM like deep, that are clumsy and actually really slow. So custom CSS properties are the answer to this problem we've actually been searching for a couple of years now. So they allow the targeting of nodes across boundaries and even mix-ins of sets of properties that can apply to specific nodes. So Addy's going to talk more about this in a little bit. And even better, CSS Custom Properties are a standard and already being implemented across multiple browsers. Now, mix-ins are a new part of the proposal. That's new. But Polymer 1.0 introduces a shim for this emerging standard. And 1.0's got a number of other smaller features, and most, but not all of the features that Polymer had previously. But Polymer itself is just one part of the story. So the existing web platform is the basis of all web apps today, and now it's more capable. We have this new layer of web components. And these components form a new ecosystem on top of which frameworks and apps exist. So now when you build an app, you have a whole new set of building blocks to choose from. For whatever problem you have as a developer, there's an element for that. And if there isn't, you can use Polymer to build your own, so that all the developers after you don't have to. But what elements are there, and how do you navigate this ecosystem? So to answer that, I'd like to invite onto the stage Taylor Savage, product manager for Polymer.
All right, thank you, Matt. So as Matt said, my name's Taylor. I'm the product manager on the Polymer team, and I'm going to talk today about some of the things that you can build with Polymer, namely elements. But first, to step back a little bit, our mission on the Polymer team is to make it easy for any developer to create a high-quality application on the web. And the raw material that we use, the raw ingredients that we use to create these applications are elements. Now, with web components in Polymer, we go from having a very small, limited subset of elements to just about anything we can imagine. And that's really, really powerful, but it's also a big responsibility. And as we know, the end result, the quality of your end result, is going to be directly reflective of the quality of the ingredients that you put in. So this is why we on the Polymer team, in addition to the library, have built sets of high-quality elements for you to build, or to use in your applications. So previously, we had two sets of elements. We had the core elements and the paper elements. We recently renamed the core elements to the iron elements. They're the strong building blocks that you use for just about any application. And we also have the paper elements, which are the reference implementation for material design. Well, today, we're going to introduce a few new element product lines. The goal of each of these product lines is to solve a very specific set of problems that web developers commonly run into. So our first product line is the Google Web Components. So at Google, we have a wide array of different services and APIs that you can add into your application that are really, really powerful. Things like maps and analytics and YouTube and Translate. But they can also be a little bit hard to use. The APIs can be a little bit finicky, and there can be a lot of boilerplate to get started. So with the Google Web Components, we've wrapped every single one of these APIs as an element. If you need to add a Google Map to your page, drop the Google Map element onto your page. You need to get data out of a spreadsheet, drop the Google Sheet element onto your page. We've standardized the way you interact with these APIs with elements, and we've created kind of a Google SDK for the web through these elements. Second product line I'd like to talk about are the Platinum elements. So as you've probably heard a lot at this conference, the web has some really amazing new primitives that we've introduced that let you do things that we've never been able to do before as web developers. Things like offline caching and things like push notifications with Service Worker. And with the Platinum elements, we want to, again, bring these really powerful features to you in the easiest way to use possible with elements. So we've wrapped Service Worker features and all of these new re-engagement features on the web as elements. If you want to drop a push notification onto your page, drop a push notification element. If you want to get offline caching, you can declaratively set up offline caching with a Platinum element, and so much more. These features that we as web developers only 6 months ago could only have dreamed about are now just a single element away. And finally, the gold elements. So e-commerce is a really hugely important part of the web platform, but it can be hard to get right, especially on mobile. Just those big, long checkout screens were not meant for a 5-inch device. So with the gold elements, we've introduced a new set of product lines specifically to help developers build really high-quality checkout flows. So things like auto-validating credit card fields, auto-validated name input fields, CVCs, expiration dates. And with these, it makes it really easy to build a mobile-first checkout flow. So we have the iron elements, the paper elements, the Google Web Components, the Platinum elements, and the gold elements. Each of these solves a specific set of problems that developers run into when building web applications. And many times, that's exactly what you want. You have a problem, and you need a specific solution to be able to fix that problem. But other times, we just want to be inspired. We just want to come across maybe a design we hadn't thought about, or a feature or application that we hadn't considered. And we want our element product lines to help you do that too, to help you just be inspired by new things that are available to you on the web. So to help with this, to help with the problem solving, and also to help with just the inspiration, we're releasing a brand new element catalog for all of these elements, where you can browse and find and play with these elements. In the catalog, you can search for elements, you can browse by element product line, play with demos, you can read element documentation, and you can even add elements to a cart, download the cart to use directly in your application. Our hope is that for any feature that you might want to create on the web, that there's an element for that. And we think the idea of related element product lines is really powerful, and what's great is we're not the only people that think that. There are tons of companies out there building incredible elements with Polymer. And we'd like to highlight a few of those today. The first is Atavist. So Atavist is a publishing company that recently released a brand new platform for storytellers to tell really engaging stories on the web. And the heart of an Atavist story is text, but it goes so far beyond that. You can bring in all kinds of different media into your Atavist story, things like movies and pictures and video, but other things like music and maps and charts, anything you might need to tell just a really engaging story. And the web is a perfect platform for that. It's a perfect platform for bringing in different kinds of media from all over the web into one place. But Atavist needed a common way to refer to these different components, to these different blocks. And the web has a great language for that as well. It's elements. And so the Atavist team used Polymer to build each of these different blocks and components. It makes them really easy to work into the Atavist platform, and it makes it really easy for the team to build more. It's a poetic use of the web platform and a really perfect example of Polymer. And it's a really just well-designed application to boot. So we've talked about kind of creativity and publishing. Now let's talk about enterprise. So the Vaadin team has one of the most popular Java applications, or Java frameworks for building enterprise applications. And they're building now all of their front-end components out as Polymer elements. And with an enterprise focus, the Vaadin team focuses very specifically on how to show big sets of data. So they've built some incredibly impressive elements that I'd like to show off today. The first is the vgrid. So grids of data can be really, really hard to get right on the web. So the Vaadin team has done all of the hard work for web developers. They've built this vgrid component. It's got all the features you'd expect: lazy loading, multi-select rows, frozen columns, and it's fully accessible. Again, Vaadin team doing the hard work of this grid. And you'll notice that the markup inside is just a table. It's just what we'd expect as developers. It's the component that makes the magic. They've also are working on and soon to release a set of chart elements for all kinds of different charts. Similarly, doing the hard work to get this data visualization right. And you can see markup inside is very similar. It's the element that does the magic. And finally, Salesforce. So Salesforce wants to ship and is shipping an SDK and API for developers to easily build applications using the Salesforce platform. And they want to make it as easy as possible to leverage the Salesforce information and data. So naturally, they shipped the Salesforce APIs as Polymer elements. You can use these Salesforce elements in addition to other Polymer elements that you might find, or any element out there, to just build a really high-quality application using the Salesforce data and the Salesforce platform. So we get asked a lot on the Polymer team, does Google use Polymer? And of course, the answer is a resounding yes. And I'd like to talk about a few applications that are using Polymer at Google today. The first is Translate. So not that long ago, the Translate team wanted to build this new product that let community members contribute different translations to the Translate engine to make it better and more effective, especially for low-volume languages. And so they built Translate Community. It's entirely material designed. It looks and feels great. It's got all the animations and ripples that you'd expect. And it's built entirely out of the paper elements and is live today. So this was built from start to finish in just a few months by 2 front-end engineers using the paper elements. And by using those paper elements, it allowed those developers to focus on just building a really great application and not on the nitty-gritty of how to implement material design. The Play team also shipped a brand new product using Polymer paper elements, Play Music. So the new Play Music front end uses paper ripples and paper toolbars and buttons. Again, this allowed the Play Music team to focus on just building a great application experience and leave the nitty-gritty material design up to the paper elements. The Play properties are also now working on their own overarching set of Polymer elements specific to the Play properties, so they can use those across all the different Play websites. And finally, a lot of uses of Polymer are still internal, but we'd like to tease one today. So this is a version of the YouTube mobile front end built entirely out of Polymer elements. And as you can see, they've achieved a pretty cool interface. It's really snappy. It's got all these great animations and transitions. And it's even got some features that you'd never expect to see on the web, like this dragging video to the corner of the screen with this smooth playing while the video plays. Again, it's using Polymer to build a top-notch app-like experience on the web. So elements are pretty cool. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with them. We're excited on the Polymer team to continue to build great element product lines, but we're even more excited to see what you, the community, can build, because the sky is truly the limit. So with that, I'll hand it off to Eric, who's going to talk a little bit about taking these elements to production.
Hello. So I've been on the Polymer team now for over 3 years, ever since the project started. And I've talked to a lot of developers in that time about how to do things in web components. I get asked very similar questions. How do I create a single-page application in web components? How do I do things like internationalization? How do I do lazy loading? How do I do URL routing? You can pretty much insert anything curious Polymer developers ask me about, and how do I do that thing in the web platform using web components? On the Polymer team, we usually have this response. There's an element for that. But I wanted to really bunker down. I wanted to experiment and build some solutions myself, try out and build apps on Google.com, productionize them, see if this stuff was viable. So last year, I got really busy. Last year at I/O, I was speaking about web components. I got super lazy in the summertime, didn't do much on GitHub then. But then if you fast forward to the fall time, I want to talk about 2 projects that we launched on Google.com that are both written in Polymer. So it's important to note the things that I'm going to be talking about in this section of the presentation, they don't use the new hot Polymer 1.0. They use an older version of Polymer. So it's a little slower, but we still use this version to productionize on Google. All that hard work, totally obsolete now, right? Just kidding. So the version of Polymer that these components we created is using doesn't matter if it's an old version. We can port to a new version of Polymer, because that's an implementation detail of the component. And we also created a really nice set of libraries for the kinds of the things we tackled during these 2 projects. So let's dive in. Let's talk about the first project, Google Santa Tracker, 2014, launched on Google.com during the month of December. If you've never seen Santa Tracker, it's very cute. So you can visit Santa's village during the month of December and kind of play a new game as each day goes along. Highly interactive. You can change the sun, change the moon. You can really mess up a snowman, too. So during the month, again, each one of these scenes, we call them, launches, and each one is a web component. A couple examples of scenes. It all works on touch. It works on mobile. Jamband is one of my favorites, where it uses Web Audio API. And this one's using WebGL. So again, each one of those scenes is a web component. And of course, the bread and butter is when you get to the end, the night before, you can see Santa delivering presents around the globe and kind of see explore those cities. So the team really took there's an element to heart for this project. We created an element for Santa. Santa-app is responsible for orchestrating the entire application. It's responsible for firing events to analytics, kind of starting and stopping sound. Inside of it, it has a bunch of declarative web components. So how do you do URL routing? Well, you create a web component for it, and that's what we did. Santa has a URL router. We tied that to an element we created for lazy loading. We created this lazy pages element. When a user selects a new scene, we dynamically load that scene. So all the JavaScript, all the CSS comes along on the fly. We were also super declarative throughout the entire project. So the loading sequence, when you load a new scene, we're allowing the scene to define its own background image and its loading color. So we're being declarative with HTML attributes. So that's Santa Tracker. I want to focus the rest of my time on the Google I/O web app. How many people have used the web app in the last couple of days? A lot. Great. We call it Iowa. So I/O web app. It's a great state in the Midwest where I'm from. But if you hear me say Iowa, that's what I'm referring to, not the state. So Iowa is a really good example of a modern web platform. It works on desktop. It works on mobile really well. You can see some of this material design take effect, where content is first and foremost, huge transition in between pages and content. If you click a video, it goes to full screen, both on desktop and mobile. And so we pretty much use every new API possible on the web platform for this project. It's a single-page app, so you can see I'm transitioning between pages, and things are loading dynamically on the fly. content slides out. We also created a custom element just to render this WebGL 3D globe. So WebGL-globe allows you to search across the globe for I/O extended events around the world. Very cool stuff. Like I said, this project used every new API you could possibly imagine. So we touched all the new stuff, Service Worker, Polymer, Material Design, using some of the new APIs that Google has. Google Sign-In 2.0 is a new API. We have an extensive backend written in Go and App Engine, web animations and promises for the material design effects. I really want to highlight the team that created this app. It was in a very short period of time, and I think that's testament to some of the reusable components the Polymer team has created for us. But it wasn't a software engineering team at Google at all. It was our developer relations team. And a couple people built this. We didn't use any special Google sauce. We used all the tools and techniques that you have available to you as a third-party developer. So how do you do client-side templating? How do you do a single-page application using web components? Well, there's an element for that. But this one's actually baked in. This one's not a custom element. This is the template tag. So a template tag, you can drop it in a page. You can put some markup in there. In Polymer, we have data binding features, so you can see the double mustaches. And you can drop a bunch of these on your page, ready to go when you activate them. In Polymer, we've extended this with this ref attribute. And so what happens is when you change that ref attribute to an ID of another template that's on the page, that content gets used instead of the original content. So we said this is kind of cool. We can change out parts of the page on the fly using this element that we have available to us now. Let's not have all these templates on a single page. Let's break them out into multiple pages and load those dynamically. So what we created was a system that used template plus HTML imports to dynamically load content. It's a different system than Santa Tracker, but also a really cool one. So if you load the schedule page in Iowa, what happens is that the server responds with a full page. It has two placeholder templates, one for this main content area, one for this main masthead area with the title of the page, and one for the main content in blue. So by default, you load the page, you get SEO-friendly static page. The server just gives you a bunch of markup. Now, if you're already in the app and you navigate to this page, we basically take over and become a single-page application at that point. So instead of getting a full page, we append this partial URL property to the URL, and that says, server, give me template partials for that page instead of the full-blown page. And so you can see what the server responds with is that template content for the masthead and the template content for the main area in the blue. This is cool, too, because the template tag allows you to define JavaScript, right? So we're allowing the page itself to define its own load handler, its unload handler, anything it needs to do to set up itself and get ready. This is a little bit of Polymer 1.0 code that does this. It's a one-liner in Polymer. So you can think of this as not as a dynamic script tag, right, where you load that on a page on the fly. But instead of JavaScript, we're loading an HTML file using dynamic HTML imports. So Polymer import href, and you give it the URL of the page of the HTML file you want to load. And you can see we're appending that partial URL property on the URL. So how did we achieve material design? Well, we really studied the spec. You see all the cool videos and the material design specification, and it really assumes zero latency. And as web developers, we know zero latency is just not a thing. You're going to be dealing with jank. You're going to be dealing with network requests, a single-page application. So how do we achieve all these fluid animations where cards are taking over the screen, pages are transitioning in between things? Very cool ripple effects that the material design spec has in it. What we did is we constructed a kind of logical animation sequence using promises and web animations. So here's an example of what happens when you transition to a new page in Iowa. First thing we do is we run this run exit animation promise. And you can see what happens is that the top head, masthead area transitions between colors of the pages, and that content slides out and fades out at the same time. And so that's what that promise does. Next one, we'll call the import page method that I just talked about. This is where that network request is actually fetching the new content using AJAX. Next thing that happens once that content is ready to go, it's on the page already, we run the enter animation. And this animation basically slides in the new content, and the content just below it at 200 milliseconds also fades in with that slight parallax effect. And the last thing we do, once these animations and dynamic content's loaded, we allow the page to run anything it needs to so it can do additional JavaScript. It knows at this point that all those animations are done. So by using promises and wrapping some calls in the Web Animations API, we were able to logically synchronize all of this asynchronous stuff that was going on, whether it's CSS animations running, whether it's network requests being made. And so that's how we achieved some of the material design effects in the app. Offline first. Really wanted to highlight this feature in Iowa. So Service Worker really unlocks a whole new set of capabilities for the web developers, whether it's page caching and being able to do proper offline, push notifications for the first time ever. Something cool that we're taking advantage of in Iowa is the fact that you can intercept network requests. So even though the user's offline in our app, we're stashing those requests to analytics, storing those in index database, and then we replay those when the user's online. So we're not losing out on that valuable insight when users don't have a network request. So first rule of Service Worker, you have to let people know about Service Worker. And what I mean by that is that offline is totally new. People don't expect apps to work offline. So if you load our app for the first time, we actually tell you that. We want you to know as a user that this thing is going to work. So we show a little toast that says, future visits will work offline. The second thing you have to deal with, right, is what happens if you're at a flaky Wi-Fi connection in a conference or you go into airplane mode. Well, you should be able to work offline as well. So in Iowa, we detect that, and we send a toast that says, hey, don't worry, changes you make to your schedule are still going to work while you're offline. So you can browse the schedule, even though I'm in airplane mode here. We can actually navigate to new pages, because all of the pages are pre-cached, all the important URLs, even though I haven't visited them before. So I can navigate to another page, the schedule page. I can even try to bookmark a session. Of course, I'm offline. That's not going to work. But we'll tell the user that. We'll store that information in an index database. And then when they're back online, all that information is going to be sent to our server. So all that stuff you just did totally will just work, and we'll inform the user that it did. Last API I want to talk about is notifications, also thanks to Service Worker. If you haven't seen a web page send a notification before, it's a new feature. That's totally all right. This is what they look like. So a proper notification integrated at the operating system level, whether it's on desktop or whether it's on mobile. And your app doesn't have to be open as seen in the screenshot. You can still get a notification. So first rule of this new API, you have to let users know what's going on. So if you visit our site in an app that doesn't support notifications, the UI is pretty plain. The settings panel doesn't have much going on. The main page doesn't have any special call to actions. If you visit in a browser like Chrome 42, we actually adapt our UI. We feature detect that you have notifications, and we give you the option to toggle on and off notifications across the site. We explain what that feature is going to give to you. And we can also enable other features like set a reminder for when Google I/O starts. That button sends a notification. We carefully constructed this around this notification experience because we know that users probably have never gone through this flow before. So we wanted to get it right in Iowa. So if you try to bookmark a session, say you want to remind when the keynote happens, we basically have to log you in first. You have to go through our OAuth flow. We have to know who to send the notification to. Once that's done, we can prompt the user's browser permission. You have to enable this feature at the browser level. And once that's done, the user's allowing us to send them notifications. We'll tell them that that thing was added to their schedule and that they'll receive a notification when I/O starts. What happens when users have disabled this? They don't want to be sent notifications from our app. Well, in this case, they'll try to do the same exact thing. But of course, we'll modify our messaging in that case. We'll say, hey, that thing was added to your schedule, but maybe you want to learn more how to enable this feature. We think it's a great feature. It's very useful to be reminded when the I/O starts. So we give them a link to say how to change this in the browser level. So sending notifications, super easy. Push, add an event listener for the push event. You give it a title. You give it a body in JavaScript. And once you call the show notification function, that's the thing that actually shows the notification in the browser. In I/O, we also are listening for the notification click. We want to re-engage users back into the site from this notification. So by doing that, we construct a URL to their schedule page so they can see what's changed in the schedule. And pro tip, we're using analytics here as well. We want to track how many people actually re-engage from that click. So we know if this feature is useful and people are using it. So I know that was really fast. That's 6 months worth of work. Both of these apps are still up on their google.com URLs. They're built using Polymer. They're open source today, so you can check them out on GitHub. I'm going to throw it over to Addy Osmani. It's his first Google I/O. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hey guys, my name is Addy Osmani. I work on developer tooling for Polymer. So the other week, my friend had a baby, and I thought I'd do something nice, like maybe draw a sketch of their baby. So I went to google.com and I looked up, how do I draw a baby? Now, if you take a look at most of the tutorials for drawing a baby, they start off a little bit like this. Just draw a circle, and you'll be fine. Now, once you see this, you're like, I can do this. This is pretty achievable. And with all the hope in the world in your eyes, you scroll down to step 2. You're like, oh, come on, I can do this. This is going to be great. And then you get to step 2. And when you get to step 2, it looks like this baby is mocking you. This isn't setting you up for success. You want better Rails than that. Because when your getting started experience looks a little bit like this, the end product looks like this. This is more like what I would end up drawing. Now, on the Polymer team, we wanted to do better. So we took a look at all of the work we've been doing over the last year in projects like the Google I/O app, Google Web Starter Kit, and the Google Santa Tracker. And we took all of our learnings and we put it into a brand new project that we're releasing today. We're calling it Polymer Starter Kit. Now, Polymer Starter Kit is an opinionated starting point for building ambitious apps using Polymer. Looks a little bit like this. You can go and download it today on developers.google.com in the brand new tooling section we've got there. Let's dive into what Polymer Starter Kit comes with. Now, Polymer Starter Kit comes with first-class support for material design. When you're trying to build a mobile web app, there are a few specific pieces you always end up needing. Things like toolbars, header panels, all of that awesomeness. Now, Polymer Starter Kit comes with support for routing and multiple views as well. Earlier, Matt talked about our brand new theming system using CSS Custom Properties. Now, everybody's got a color scheme that they love using, and using CSS Custom Properties, you can easily go and retheme your entire application in just a few lines of code. This is a really, really powerful system, and we think it's going to make it super simple for you to customize your apps. Google is really big on mobile, and with Polymer Starter Kit, we wanted to make sure that you have good Rails for the mobile web, which is why we include first-class support for things like meta theme color, so colorizing the address bar, and web app install banners, so your users can stay engaged with your application. That's already set up for you. We also include good defaults for icons cross-device. So whether you're on Android, iOS, or Windows Phone, you've got good defaults there that you can go and then customize. Now this year, the material design team have published their brand new guidelines on adaptive design. This builds on responsive and tries to look at how we can customize interactions that also work great depending on the context and the device that we're on. So what are Polymer doing there? Well, the first thing we're looking at is how we can improve support for responsiveness. Now, the material design guidelines now give you good guidelines around media queries and breakpoints. So Polymer Starter Kit includes all of these defaults set up for you. Now, these defaults are just one set of breakpoints that work well for us based on the devices that we support, but you can go in and easily customize them per your needs. How many people here love templates? You guys like templates? Everybody likes templates. Now, I love templates because they're a little bit like a coloring book. You can go in and very easily start like just putting in your content and building up your app, which is why with 1.0, we're also introducing a brand new set of templates for your applications. Things like navigation card layouts, navigation list details for building things like contact apps, as well as wider card views. Now, this is only a small subset of the templates that are available today. Now, earlier, Eric talked about the importance of offline. In 2015, the reality is, if your app doesn't work offline, you really don't have a good mobile web experience. Good news is, the Polymer Starter Kit is offline first by default. You load an application built using Polymer Starter Kit up, you go into airplane mode, go offline, load it up, and you can still access your entire application. This is with zero configuration necessary. It's already set up for you. Go in, navigate to any of your routes, and the content all still works. Now, when it comes to Service Worker, it's a fantastic set of APIs, but there's still a lot of configuration required to get this set up. Thankfully, there's an element for that. We dive into the Polymer Elements catalog that Taylor was talking about earlier. We can see that we've got access to Service Worker caching with the platinum set of elements. So here, we're declaratively registering our Service Worker and setting up a caching strategy in just a few lines of code. Here, I'm saying that my caching strategy is going to be network first. I'm just passing in a list of the files that I would like to be pre-cached. Let's talk about productionizing apps. Now, we all know about the importance of a build process. A build process is a promise to your users that you're going to make sure that whatever you're shipping down the line is as small and as fast as possible. Now, on the Polymer team, we're big fans of Gulp. It's a fantastic streaming build system. And so out of the box, we include support for unit testing using a brand new version of Web Component Tester, quality and testing, minification using tools like Vulcanize, and cross-device reload using Browser Sync. Now, Browser Sync is particularly awesome because it means that if you're making any changes to your Polymer Starter Kit application, you'll get to see those changes propagate across all of your devices at once. It'll also synchronize things like clicks and scrolls, making it really, really pleasant to do cross-device development. Now, you've seen Polymer Starter Kit, but you might be wondering, well, this is great, but has anyone actually tried building a real app with it, something that's non-trivial? So let's dive into our chemistry set. We've got a lot of elements that are available. Let's see what they can do. What if we were to put together an application that we would use on the go, something like an RSS reader? So we did. This is Paper Reader. It's built using Polymer Starter Kit. Allows you to log in using your Google account, your GitHub account, any service that you have an existing account with. And you can go and view all the stories that you love following along. Here we can see there's a ton of I/O news out at the moment. I can also go and favorite feeds. I can set feeds to be read or unread, and all of the actions that you would expect to see in a normal RSS reader. Now, for this type of application, one of the first things you need is the ability to pull in Google Feeds. Thankfully, there's a Google Feeds API. And I'm glad to say that there's an element for that as well. The Google Feeds element, which declaratively allows you to go and say, well, download me this particular RSS atom or media RSS feed. To specify the URL and the count of entries you'd like returned, and it can go and help you very quickly add content to your page. Now, I mentioned the idea of favoriting inside this application and setting something to read or unread. That requires a back end of some sort. Now, on the Polymer team, we love using Firebase, which is why there's a brand new set of elements inside the Google Web Components product catalog for Firebase as well. The Firebase element allows you to authenticate using Google, GitHub, and other services. So here, for example, in a few lines of code, I'm connecting up to a Firebase instance, setting a provider, so I want to use my Google account, and this just allows me to authenticate. I can then use other elements in this set to get and set data from Firebase too. So here I'm just connecting up to an instance, and I'm able to loop over that data and just output it to the page. We talked about the importance of offline. Here I've gone offline in airplane mode in Paper Reader. I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm able to see all of my stories. I'm able to browse through stories I haven't seen before. I'm able to go in and view individual entries. And this just means that as I'm on the go, I can easily use this stuff. And there's, of course, an element for this as well, the Platinum Service Worker elements we showed you earlier. Now, push notifications are huge. They allow your users to opt in to getting timely messages about things that they care about. Here, we've got Polymer Starter Kit receiving a notification about new stories. I can go and just tap this notification, and I can view any of the new stories that I haven't read just yet, and they'll just show up. Now, there's an element for this, too. The push notification Platinum elements, which declaratively allow me to set up push notifications and trigger them inside my application's lifecycle. In just a few lines of code, we get something that's really, really powerful. So you've seen Polymer Starter Kit. It comes with components, layout, theming, and build tools, everything that you need to get started. So you're in the driving seat now. You've got a whole lot of elements available at your disposal. There's an element for many things. What are you going to build? With that, I'd like to hand it back to Matt.
So for the last 2 years, Polymer has been about promise. So the promise of web components, the promise of interoperability, the promise of this declarative renaissance. So now that promise is reality. So web components have been shipping in Chrome for a year. There's a brand new production-ready Polymer out today. Google is using Polymer, and Taylor showed you a selection of major Google properties using it today, like YouTube, Play Music, and Translate, and there's a whole lot more. Third parties are using Polymer in production today, like Salesforce, Atavist, and Vaadin. The Santa Tracker and I/O Web App are offline enabled and totally awesome. And Polymer Starter Kit can get you started today. And this is just the beginning, so we've got a lot more features coming at a rapid pace, ones we had to leave on the cutting room floor for 1.0, as well as more product lines and elements. For the very latest and to learn more, go to polymerproject.org or our Slack channel where you can talk to the team itself. And we're almost out of time, but we've got so much more to show that we almost need our own conference just for Polymer and the web. And there's an element for that. Oh wait, sorry, there's a conference for that. So join us for the Polymer Summit on September 15th in Amsterdam. So that's a picture of the venue. It's this awesome venue on the water. So join us for a full day of learning about Polymer and cutting-edge web development from the people who know it best, the Polymer and Chrome teams. So we'll have more info on that in the next month. There's a bit.ly link on there, bit.ly/polymer-summit if you want to register for information today. And just for a brief moment before we conclude, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Polymer team for making today possible, with a whole lot of late nights and weekends, especially lately, even last night. So please join me in thanking them. And more importantly, be nice if you find bugs. So that's all the time we have. Thanks and enjoy the rest of the show. We have to get out of here really quickly, but if you find us out there, we can answer questions. Thanks.